lives of individual patients. And more examples, cleft lip, palate, hydrocephalus, facial tumors, and head and neck cancers. Let's look at the next one. This is a little child, and I think I saw this one with Operation Smile. And you can see he has a bilateral cleft. Next slide. And we got a result which we would consider very good. With the swelling gone, he'd be essentially normal. And hydrocephalus was very common. There was a general surgeon who had learned how to treat hydrocephalus, and also occasionally a neurosurgeon would come down and they were treated. Of course, this is after it had been present for some time. And this is seen from Operation Smile, and I believe this was in Colombia. And you can see we didn't have many facilities, so we had to combine our work with 3 teams working in one place. It was amazing how much could be accomplished. And the results were really favorable, received, of course. Next. This was another one, back to the other. There we go. Oh, there we go. And you can imagine what it would be like to go through life with a deformity like this. Many we saw, the question that's often been asked, was there an increased incidence of lip and palate? I don't think it was so much that as the fact that there was a backlog, people who did not get treated, so they piled up. And this is another one that we did, and this was next, again, what we would consider a very good result, and which would change the life of this individual. And that's one of the really satisfying things. And that with 45 minutes or an hour, we can completely change the life of a child with cleft lip and palates to a lesser extent. Next. This is another little child we saw. He had a tumor. It was soft and freely movable. I was sure that it was benign. So we removed it, and underneath we found a perfectly normal eye, and were able to restore the child to essentially normal appearance. And finally, this was an elderly gentleman, and this was in Haiti. And he had obvious head and neck cancer there. He had been told both by previous predecessors of mine and local surgeons nothing could be done about it, but since head and neck cancer happened to be one of my main interests, I examined him. I felt it was movable, and I felt that we could possibly remove it without violating it. And he said, I don't care if I die, it hurts so much, I want you to take it all off regardless. And so we did. You're giving me a, it's all right, you can go back for a minute. Anyway, we were able to remove it in its entirety, though I can't guarantee that he never had a recurrence. But it's very interesting in Haiti, and you saw some of it before, the wards are public. Everything is visible to everybody. And he had been in a ward with a large number of men, and they were aware of the tumor, they'd seen it and seen how much it hurt him and so forth. And when he came back to the ward, next slide, he was minus his tumor, he was minus his pain, and the first thing that happened was all the men around the ward gathered to look at it and then applauded. And you might think, well, that was great, but that wasn't the real blessing of it. Well, after I removed it, he took his hands and put them on my head and blessed me for having done that. And I felt, if we can go to the next slide, that if there had been no one else I'd been able to treat on that trip, I would have really felt good about having been able to do that. And my conclusion here is short-term missions overseas may be challenging, tiring, exasperating, frustrating, and costly, but such service is almost always rewarding. And with that, I'll take questions if you have some. Yes?
Did you ever have anyone go with you who did not have medical skills? And if so, what else would they do?
I had a lot of people, and in fact, many times, and it still happens, people will ask, well, can I go? What can I do? And most of that kind of experience for me facilities there, but a medical student could be a gopher. He could bring patients back and forth, and they could also help take care of patients post-operatively. And in fact, there were other people who had no medical connection whatsoever. A woman who was a very valuable nurse wanted to come, and we needed her, and she said she would come, but only if her husband could come. Well, he was a welder, and we made him into a supply site. He could rotate, he could evolve, he could bring the instruments, and he learned to do a lot. He was thrilled to be able to do it. We were thrilled to have him. And all sorts of other things. When we were in Haiti especially, in Mexico, there was a Mexican surgeon who really had a heart for his people, and he made it his job to find a hospital where he could say, give me 2 rooms or 3 rooms, and he'd set an operating room and bring the supplies in, and then people of all sorts. And this particular group that I was working in there, they will involve a lot of people. In fact, their families who take their families over there in the summer, there's a summer, so that their kids can get an idea of how the other half lives. And it's a great experience, and they can be helpful at the same time. Again, as gophers. And we've had the experience of converting internists into tropical experts. We had a guy who came, and he had been doing radiology, but the opportunity continued that, and there's not so much opportunity to do radiology because there's not much radiology in many of those places. So he decided, he thought he could still remember, and he went out on, they have medical clinics, both surgical and medical clinics. And they would go out, and there were other general practitioners or internists, and whenever he didn't know what to do, he'd just ask them, and they'd tell him, and he got so he's very competent now. I think he goes without that assistance. But yes, there are things to do. There have to be some precautions because there are some occasional adventurers who sort of like to infiltrate, and they don't observe the standards that should be observed when you're doing this kind of work. So yes, I still get requests, and though I'm not in my 80s, I am in my 80s. Though I am in my 80s, I'm not doing much more of this now, but I'll often serve as a conduit to help people go, and they're really glad to go. Any other questions? Yes.
There's an organization called Operation Smile.
Yes.
Operates in South America.
They work all over the country, and I was with them twice.
It's my understanding that if this isn't cured or helped with the child, they take the child out someplace and kill it.
That's not something I'm aware of. I think that's very unlikely. And that may be overstatements to get people to give. And there's another group that works very closely with them now. They do good work, but they're very volume-oriented. You're supposed to get your quota done at a given time. But they did very good work, and I learned from some of them because they had such huge experience. Any other questions? Yes.
John, for those in the audience who don't know John, I think in regards to the question about what can other people do, you might also want to mention your wife Janet and the fact that most of what you've done through all these years you two do together.
Well,
she's a big help also.
Well, the first thing is she let me do it. Secondly, because she's a really good musician. On some occasions when we went over to do short-term missions, like in New Guinea, I guess it was, there were a bunch of young guys who really wanted to learn how to read music. And so she cut out a keyboard, paper keyboard, and presented to them and showed them how. And she did other things she would do would be to read. We'd take Reader's Digest with us and teach them English as much as we could and show them how to read. So there are things for people who want to do it. Now, I would be the first to say that I would never have been able to do half of what I've done if it hadn't been for the strong support of a woman whom I never deserved. After 62 years. Any other, yes?
I attended for a number of years the community Bible study, and
Yeah.
I think that is.
Yeah.
And I just want to say you were great.
for 21 years, and then I thought somebody else ought to have a chance. For another of my colleagues, Dr. Jerry Richardson, a psychiatrist, is taken over the role. But it's still, can I give a commercial?
Yeah.
Community Bible study we started about 24 years ago, and we held it at Christ at the church, the big church downtown. And we had about, by the time we'd been going for a while, we had about 270 permanent, people who signed up, and we'd have about 180, 190 on a given thing. And it was interdenominational, it was self-study, and we had many, many Lutherans as well.
Doctors Without, is it Doctors Without Borders?
Yes,
Are you familiar with that?
I am. They do excellent work, but they're a bit of a struggle for most people because they want you to commit a certain amount of time, and it's a little less now than it was 6 months. Not many people can leave their practice and go for 6 months. So they do excellent work. I have no criticism to make. Just that's the problem. I inquired about it at one time thinking,